I ordered that DNA test to prove my boyfriend was cheating on me. Instead, it revealed a family secret so shocking that it completely changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the people closest to me. My name's Sarah. I'm 28, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was living with my boyfriend Marcus in a cozy apartment in Portland, working as a graphic designer, and genuinely believing I'd found my person. We'd been together for 3 years, and honestly, those first 2.5 years felt like something out of a romantic movie. Marcus and I met at a coffee shop near my old office. I know. Super, right? But hear me out. I was there every Tuesday morning, same table, same oat milk latte, working on freelance projects before my day job. He started showing up around the same time, always ordering this ridiculously complicated drink. Half-calf macchiato, with extra foam and vanilla syrup, but only on Tuesdays. After about 3 weeks of awkward eye contact and shy smiles, he finally walked over. "So," he said, sliding into the chair across from me, "I've been trying to figure out if you're a creature of habit, or if Tuesday is just your lucky coffee day." His smile was crooked in the most endearing way. And I remember thinking this guy's either really confident or really nervous. Turns out it was both. We talked for 2 hours that first morning. He was a software developer, originally from Chicago, with this infectious laugh and the kind of genuine curiosity about people that you do and find very often. When he asked about my design work, he actually listened to my answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. By the time I realized I was 20 minutes late for work, I was already completely smitten. Our relationship moved pretty naturally from there. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into weekend adventures around the city. Marcus had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. He'd surprised me with tickets to art shows he'd researched just because I mentioned liking a particular artist. He learned to make my grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, just so I could have them when I was missing home. 6 months in, when his lease was up, moving in together felt like the most natural thing in the world. Living with Marcus was easy in a way that surprised me. We had similar cleanliness standards, we both loved cooking together, and we rarely fought about the stupid stuff that breaks up most couples. He was thoughtful about space, both physical and emotional. When I needed to work late on a project, he'd quietly handle dinner and leave me a plate in the fridge with a sweet note. When he was stressed about a deadline, I'd run him a bath and give him space to decompress. My family adored him. My mom would light up whenever he called, and my dad, who was notoriously suspicious of any guy I bring home, actually started inviting Marcus to their weekly golf games. My younger sister Emma, who's usually pretty reserved around my boyfriends, would text him directly about TV show recommendations and inside jokes. It felt like he'd seamlessly woven himself into the fabric of our family. Marcus was close with his family too, though they lived across the country, and his parents had divorced when he was in high school and both had remarried. He talked to his mom, Linda, at least twice a week, and his relationship with his stepdad seemed really solid. His biological father was more distant. They'd text on birthdays and holidays, but that was about it. Marcus always said it didn't bother him much, that his stepdad had been more of a real father figure anyway. For 2.5 years, we built this beautiful, comfortable life together. We adopted a cat named Biscuit, started talking about marriage, and even looked at houses in neighborhoods we might want to settle down in eventually. I genuinely thought I'd won the relationship lottery. Marcus was kind, funny, ambitious, but not obsessive about work, and he made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. We had our problems, sure, but they were normal relationship stuff. He left dishes in the sink longer than I liked. I had a tendency to overcommit to social plans and then feel overwhelmed. He was terrible at remembering to buy groceries, and I got cranky when I was hungry. Nothing that felt like a red flag or a deal breaker. Looking back now, I can see that our relationship was built on a foundation of genuine affection and compatibility, but also on this unspoken assumption that we were both exactly who we appeared to be. We trusted each other completely, maybe even naively. We shared passwords, we talked about everything, we made decisions together. The idea that either of us might be hiding something significant just never crossed our minds. But then around the 2.5-year mark, something shifted. It was undramatic at first. Just small changes that I initially brushed off as normal relationship evolution or work stress. Marcus started getting more phone calls that he'd step outside to take. He'd get text messages and quickly flip his phone face down. He seemed distracted during conversations, like his mind was somewhere else. I told myself I was being paranoid. Every long-term relationship goes through phases where the initial intensity settles into something more comfortable. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something was different, something was off, and I couldn't shake the worry that maybe, just maybe, the person I trusted most in the world wasn't being completely honest with me. The first real alarm bell went off on a Thursday evening in March. Marcus had been getting more of those mysterious phone calls, and this time, when his phone rang during dinner, I caught a glimpse of the caller ID before he flipped it over. It just said L with a heart emoji. My stomach dropped. "Who's L?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual as he declined the call. "Oh, just someone from work," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll call them back later. Here's the thing." Marcus had told me about all his coworkers. His team was small, and I'd met most of them at various happy hours and company events. There was no one whose name started with L, and definitely no one important enough to have a heart emoji in his contacts. I wanted to call him out right then, but something held me back. Maybe I was scared of what the answer might be. Over the next few weeks, the signs became harder to ignore. Marcus started working late more often, but when I'd call his office, the receptionist would say he'd already left for the day. He'd come home with excuses about grabbing drinks with colleagues or running errands. But he seemed nervous, jumpy, like he was constantly worried about being caught in a lie. Then there were the small physical changes. He started dressing better for work, wearing cologne more often, paying more attention to his hair. When I complimented him on looking good, he'd get this weird, guilty expression and change the subject. Also became protective of his phone in a way that felt completely foreign to our relationship. We'd always been the type of couple who would use each other's phones without thinking twice, but suddenly his was always locked. Always face down, always just out of reach. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon, when we were at my sister Emma's house for her birthday barbecue. Emma had just turned 25, and my whole family was there. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole crew. Marcus had always loved these family gatherings, but that day he seemed distracted and kept stepping away to check his phone. About halfway through the party, his phone started ringing insistently. He excused himself and walked to the far corner of the yard to answer it. I watched him through the kitchen window as he paced back and forth, his free hand running through his hair, in that way he did when he was stressed or frustrated. The conversation went on for nearly 15 minutes, and when he finally came back inside, he looked shaken. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, fine, just work stuff," he said, but his voice was tight, and he couldn't look me in the eye. That's when my sister Emma, who had been watching the whole exchange, pulled me aside. Emma's always been perceptive, sometimes uncomfortably so. She had this serious expression that immediately put me on edge. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" she said, guiding me toward her bedroom. "I don't want to overstep, but I'm worried about you and Marcus." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "That phone call, the way he's been acting today. It reminds me of how Jake was acting right before I found out he was cheating." Jake was Emma's ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been messy and painful. "I know you love him, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but something feels off." I wanted to defend Marcus, to tell Emma she was being paranoid, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, I'd been having the same concerns, and hearing them voiced by someone else made them feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Have you noticed anything else?" Emma asked gently. "Changes in his routine, being secretive about his phone, working late more often." I found myself nodding. And as I started listing all the small changes I'd observed over the past month, they stopped seeming small. Together, they painted a picture that made my chest tight with anxiety. That night, after we got home from the party, I tried to bring it up with Marcus. I told him I'd been feeling like something was different between us, that he seemed distant lately. Instead of reassuring me or opening up about what might be going on, he got defensive in a way that felt completely unlike him. "I don't know why you're looking for problems where there aren't any," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "Work has been stressful, that's all. I'm sorry if I seem distracted, but I'm dealing with a lot right now." "What kind of stuff at work?" I pressed. "Maybe I can help, or at least listen. It's complicated technical stuff, Sarah. You wouldn't understand." The dismissive way he said it stung, partly because it was so unlike him to talk down to me, and partly because I could tell he was deflecting. That night, lying in bed next to him as he slept, I stared at the ceiling and felt like I was living with a stranger. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with would never brush off my concerns so coldly. He'd never make me feel stupid for asking questions or wanting to support him through a difficult time. This version of him felt guarded, secretive, and increasingly unfamiliar. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to details I'd previously ignored. I noticed that he'd changed his phone passcode. I noticed that he'd started doing his own laundry, including washing his clothes immediately after work instead of letting them sit in the hamper like he used to. I noticed that, when we were out together, he seemed constantly alert, like he was watching for someone or worried about being seen. The worst part was the way he started treating me. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it was distant. Conversations felt forced. Physical affection became perfunctory. He stopped asking about my day with genuine interest and started giving distracted, one-word responses when I told him about mine. I felt like I was slowly losing the person I loved most, and I had no idea how to get him back or even what was causing the change. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong. Despite his denials, I was becoming more and more convinced that someone else was involved. The idea for the DNA test came to me at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, and honestly, it wasn't my finest moment of logical thinking. I'd been lying awake for hours, spiraling through every possible explanation for Marcus's behavior, when I remembered something my coworker had mentioned a few weeks earlier. Jenna from the marketing department had been telling a group of us about her sister's messy divorce, and how they'd used some kind of forensic DNA testing to prove her husband's affair. Apparently you could test hair, saliva, even traces left on clothing to identify if someone else's DNA was present. At the time it had seemed like something out of a crime show, but now, in my sleep-deprived, anxiety-ridden state, it felt like a potential solution. I spent the rest of that night researching DNA testing services online. What I found was both more and less complicated than I'd expected. There were definitely forensic options for testing personal items, but they were expensive and required pretty fresh samples. More realistic were the standard paternity and relationship verification tests that could be done with simple cheek swabs or saliva samples. The more I read, the more I convinced myself that this was my answer. If Marcus was having an affair, maybe I could find evidence through DNA testing. Maybe there would be traces on his clothes, or maybe I could somehow get a sample from whoever he was seeing. I knew it sounded crazy even as I was thinking it, but I felt desperate for some kind of concrete proof, one way or another. I ordered a basic DNA kit from one of the major testing companies, telling myself I'd figure out exactly how to use it once it arrived. The kit cost about $100, which felt like a small price to pay for peace of mind, assuming I could actually find a way to make it work. When the package arrived 3 days later, I hid it in my desk drawer at work and spent my lunch break reading through all the instructions. That's when I realized how flawed my plan actually was. The test was designed for standard relationship verification, determining if two people were related or confirming paternity. It wasn't some kind of magical adultery detector that could identify mystery DNA from clothing fibers. But then I had another idea, one that felt simultaneously more reasonable and more invasive. What if I tested Marcus himself? Not to catch him cheating exactly, but to establish a baseline of his genetic profile. If I could get him to take the test under some other pretense, maybe I'd learn something useful, or at least rule out my suspicions if nothing unusual came up. I spent the entire weekend crafting what I thought was a brilliant plan. I'd suggest that we both take DNA tests as a fun couples activity. People were doing those ancestry and health screening tests all the time, sharing results on social media, discovering distant relatives, learning about their genetic predispositions. It seemed like the kind of thing a normal, happy couple might do together. When I brought it up to Marcus on Sunday night, I tried to sound casual and enthusiastic. "Hey, I've been seeing all these ads for DNA testing. I thought it might be fun for us to do them together," I said, pulling out my laptop to show him one of the company websites. "We could learn about our ancestry, see if we have any genetic health risks to think about, maybe find some distant relatives." Marcus's reaction was immediate and intense in a way that completely caught me off guard. His face went pale, and he actually took a step backward. "Why would you want to do that?" he asked, and there was something in his voice, fear maybe, or panic, that made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. I don't know, I just thought it would be interesting, I said, studying his expression. Don't you want to know more about your genetic background? Not really, he said quickly. Those tests aren't even accurate. And besides, I don't want some company having my genetic information. It's a privacy nightmare. His reasons sounded logical enough, but his body language told a completely different story. He was fidgeting with his hands, avoiding eye contact, and he had that same nervous energy I'd been noticing for weeks. Come on, it could be fun, I pressed. Partly because I was genuinely curious now about why he was so resistant. We could compare results, see what we have in common genetically. Sarah, I said no. His tone was sharper than I'd ever heard it, almost angry. Can we please drop it? That night I couldn't sleep at all. Marcus's reaction to the DNA test suggestion had been so extreme, so out of character, that it felt like confirmation of everything I'd been suspecting. Normal people might have privacy concerns about genetic testing, but they didn't panic at the mere suggestion of it. I started wondering if maybe Marcus was hiding something bigger than an affair. Maybe he had some kind of genetic condition he didn't want me to know about. Maybe he'd lied about his family background or his medical history. Maybe there was something in his DNA that would reveal information he desperately wanted to keep secret. The next morning, while Marcus was in the shower, I made a decision that I knew crossed a line, but felt necessary given everything that had been happening. I took the DNA test kit from my work bag and carefully collected a sample from Marcus's toothbrush. It wasn't the ideal way to collect saliva, but according to the instructions, it should provide enough genetic material for testing. I felt awful doing it, sneaky and invasive, and like I was violating his trust in the worst possible way. But I also felt like he already violated mine by becoming secretive and dishonest about whatever was going on in his life. If he wouldn't tell me the truth directly, maybe science could. I mailed the sample that afternoon, along with one I'd collected for myself, telling myself that once I had the results, everything would become clear. Either the test would reveal something that explained Marcus's recent behavior, or it would come back completely normal, and I knew that my suspicions were unfounded, and I needed to look for other explanations. What I never could have imagined was that the test results would reveal something that had nothing to do with Marcus at all, but would completely upend everything I thought I knew about my own family. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was in a client meeting, but I didn't see it until I got home that evening. The subject line was simple: "Your DNA results are ready." My hands were actually shaking as I opened my laptop. I'd been checking my email obsessively for the past 10 days, ever since I'd submitted the samples. Every day that passed without results felt like an eternity. I'd started wondering if I'd somehow messed up the collection process or if the testing company was backed up. But here it was, finally, the moment of truth that I'd been both desperately waiting for and completely dreading. I clicked through to the results portal and logged in with the account I'd created. Marcus wasn't home yet. He'd texted to say he'd be working late again, which no longer surprised me, so I had the apartment to myself. I poured a glass of wine, took a deep breath, and opened the first set of results. My own DNA profile looked exactly like what I'd expected. European ancestry, mostly Irish and German, with some Scandinavian mixed in, which matched everything I'd been told about my family background. A few minor genetic predispositions to things like lactose intolerance and seasonal allergies, which I already knew about. Nothing surprising, nothing concerning, nothing that explained the growing tension in my relationship. Then I opened Marcus's results, and immediately something felt wrong. Though it took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. The ancestry breakdown was completely different from what Marcus had told me about his family. He'd always said his father's side was mostly German and Polish, with his mother's family being Irish and English. But according to the DNA test, Marcus was approximately 50% sub-Saharan African, 25% Irish, and 25% mixed European. I stared at the screen, refreshing the page twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Marcus is a light-skinned black man who, until that moment, I had assumed was white. It sounds ridiculous now, but he'd never explicitly told me his racial background, and I'd never asked. I'd made assumptions based on his appearance and his last name, and apparently, I'd been completely wrong. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. As I scrolled down through the rest of the results, I found a section labeled DNA Relatives that showed potential genetic matches with other people who'd used the same testing service. At the top of the list, marked as an extremely high match with 99.9% probability, It's a name that made my heart stop completely. Emma Chen. Emma Chen. My sister Emma, who had apparently taken a DNA test at some point and linked it to her account under her full name. According to the results I was staring at, Marcus and my sister Emma were siblings. I read that line probably 15 times before the words actually penetrated my brain. Marcus and Emma. Siblings. Which meant that Marcus, my boyfriend of 3 years, the man I'd been living with and planning a future with, was my sister's brother, which meant he was my brother too. I slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, where I promptly threw up everything I'd eaten that day. My entire body was shaking, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath. This had to be some kind of mistake. DNA tests weren't perfect, right? There had to be an error in the processing, or maybe I'd somehow mixed up the samples. But even as I was trying to rationalize what I'd seen, pieces started falling into place in the most horrible way possible. Marcus's reaction to my DNA test suggestion suddenly made perfect sense. The mysterious phone calls that had been happening more frequently? What if they weren't from another woman, but from his biological family? What if the L in his contacts wasn't a lover, but Linda? Not his mother, but maybe a biological relative he'd recently connected with. I thought about Emma's comment at her birthday party, how she'd said something felt off about Marcus's behavior. Had she somehow recognized him, or sensed something familiar without consciously understanding what it was? The timeline started coming together in my head like pieces of the world's worst puzzle. Marcus moving to Portland 3 years ago, right around the time we met, his reluctance to talk about his biological father, his complicated relationship with his family history, the way he'd seemed so comfortable with my family so quickly, like he belonged with us in a way that had felt magical at the time, but now seemed sinister and wrong. I spent the next 2 hours sitting on my bathroom floor, alternating between panic attacks and desperate attempts to find some other explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe there was another Emma Chen who'd taken a DNA test. Maybe the results were showing some kind of distant cousin relationship that the algorithm had misinterpreted as sibling. Maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination and none of this was actually real. But when I finally worked up the courage to open the laptop again and look at the results more carefully, there was no ambiguity. The genetic markers were clear, the probability percentages were definitive, and there was even a family tree visualization that showed Marcus and Emma as siblings, with shared parents that neither of them had apparently ever known about. I started crying then, really crying, not just from shock but from grief, because the man I loved, the person I'd been planning to spend my life with, was gone, not dead, but gone in a way that was somehow even more final. Everything we'd built together, every moment of happiness, every plan for the future, all of it was based on something that could never, ever be okay. The worst part was that I couldn't even be angry at him, not really, because it was becoming clear that he hadn't known either. His recent behavior, the secrecy, the stress. What if he'd recently discovered the truth about his biological family and was trying to figure out how to tell me? What if those mysterious phone calls were with adoption agencies or genetic counselors or social workers? When I heard Marcus's key in the lock around 10 o'clock that night, I was still sitting on the couch with the laptop open, staring at the results and waiting for them to somehow make sense. Marcus took one look at my face when he walked in and knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. I was sitting on the couch with the laptop open in front of me, tears streaming down my cheeks, probably looking like I'd been hit by a truck. "Sarah, what happened? Are you okay?" He dropped his work bag and rushed over to me, reaching out like he was going to pull me into a hug, but I flinched away from his touch. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sit down." He sat on the edge of the coffee table facing me, his expression shifting from concern to fear as he saw the DNA test results still displayed on my laptop screen. "Marcus," I said, and saying his name felt strange now, like I was talking to a complete stranger. "I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever taken a DNA test before?" The color drained from his face. "Sarah, I can explain. Just answer the question. Have you taken a DNA test?" "Yes," he whispered. "About 6 weeks ago. And what did you find out?" We put his head in his hands and was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red with unshed tears. "I found out that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie," he said. "I found out that my biological parents aren't who I thought they were, and that I have siblings I never knew existed." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What siblings? Marcus. Sarah, please let me explain how this happened. What siblings? Repeated louder this time. A sister named Emma Chen, he said, and hearing him say her name out loud made everything feel suddenly, horribly real. And apparently, a sister named Sarah Chen too. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of both of us breathing. I closed the laptop because I couldn't stand to look at the results anymore. How long have you known? He asked. 6 weeks, maybe 7. The results came back, and I saw Emma's name. And at first I thought it was some kind of coincidence because Chen is a common name. But then I looked at her profile and she had a photo, and I recognized her immediately from your family gatherings. I thought I might throw up again. You've known for 6 weeks that my sister is your sister, and you didn't tell me? I didn't know how to tell you, he said, and now he was crying too. Sarah, I was trying to figure out what to do. I've been calling genetic counselors, therapists, anyone who might be able to help me understand how to handle this situation. Those mysterious phone calls suddenly made complete sense. The L in your phone. Lisa Martinez, a genetic counselor who specializes in situations like this. She's been trying to help me figure out how to tell you and Emma without completely destroying everyone's lives. I felt simultaneously relieved that he hadn't been having an affair, and devastated that the truth was so much worse than cheating could ever be. When did you find out about me? I asked. When did you realize that I was your sister too? About 3 weeks ago. Lisa helped me understand how to read the full results, and that's when I saw your name on the sibling list too. His voice broke completely. Sarah, I didn't know when we met. I swear to you, I had no idea. If I had known, I never would have. Stop, I said, because I couldn't hear him finish that sentence. Just stop talking for a minute. I got up and walked to the kitchen, not because I needed anything, but because I needed space to think. Everything made sense now. His recent distance, his reluctance to be physically affectionate, his panic when I'd suggested we take DNA tests together. He'd been trying to figure out how to extract himself from our relationship without telling me why. Marcus, I called from the kitchen. Are Emma and I adopted too? I don't know, he called back. Lisa thinks it's possible that all 3 of us were placed for adoption from the same biological parents, possibly at different times. But she said you and Emma would need to decide if you want to pursue finding out more about our biological family. Our biological family? The phrase sounded so wrong, but so accurate at the same time. I walked back to the living room where Marcus was still sitting on the coffee table, looking completely destroyed. We can't be together anymore, I said, and saying it out loud felt like tearing my own heart out. You know that, right? This relationship is over. I know, he whispered. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry for all of it. Are you going to tell Emma? I don't know. Lisa thinks it might be better if it comes from you, since you and Emma are so close. But I'll do whatever you think is best. We talked for another 2 hours that night, mostly about logistics. Where would Marcus live? Would we separate our finances? What would we tell our friends and families about why we broke up? We agreed that he'd stay in our guest room for a few days, while he looked for a new apartment. And that we'd tell people we'd grown apart and wanted different things, which was technically true, just not in the way people would assume. The hardest part was accepting that despite everything, I still loved him. The person I'd fallen for, the man who'd made me laugh and feel safe and dream about the future, that person was real. Our connection had been real. But it was also impossible, and knowing the truth meant that every good memory we'd made together was now tainted with something that felt shameful and wrong, even though neither of us had done anything intentionally harmful. When we finally went to bed that night, in separate rooms for the first time in almost 3 years, I realized that the DNA test had actually saved our relationship, just not in the way I'd expected. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a coffee shop. Not the same one where Marcus and I met, because I can't handle that level of emotional masochism. Writing in the journal my therapist recommended, Dr. Patterson says that processing traumatic revelations through writing can help create narrative coherence out of chaos, which is a fancy way of saying it helps your brain make sense of things that feel completely senseless. Marcus moved out a week after our confrontation. We were civil about it, even kind, but being around each other felt surreal in a way that was exhausting for both of us. He found an apartment across town. We divided our belongings with the sort of careful fairness you'd expect from 2 people who still cared about each other despite everything. And Biscuit went with him because she'd always been more attached to him anyway. Telling Emma was the hardest conversation I've ever had in my life. I drove to her apartment the day after Marcus moved out, sat her down in her living room, and basically word vomited the entire story. I started with the DNA test, walked her through the results, and watched her face go through the same progression of confusion, disbelief, and horror that mine had gone through a week earlier. "Wait," she said, about halfway through my explanation. "Marcus, your Marcus, is our brother, apparently." She was quiet for a long time, just sitting there processing. Then she said, "You know what's really messed up? I always liked him, like genuinely liked him. Not just because you were dating him. I thought he was funny and smart, and he was always really good to you. Now I'm wondering if that was some kind of weird biological recognition thing." Emma handled the news better than I expected, actually. She's always been the more pragmatic of the two of us. Her first instinct was to start problem solving rather than catastrophizing. She wanted to know if we should tell our parents, if we should try to find our biological parents, if there were other siblings we didn't know about. We decided to tell Mom and Dad together, which led to another devastating conversation, but one that ultimately brought some clarity to the situation. Turns out, my parents had always known I was adopted. They'd adopted me as a baby, but they'd never told me because they wanted me to feel like I fully belonged in the family. Emma, meanwhile, was their biological child, which explained why she'd never questioned her origins the way I apparently should have. "We should have told you," my mom said, crying harder than I'd seen her cry since my grandfather died. "We always planned to tell you when you were older, but then it never seemed like the right time. Eventually it felt like the information would just be hurtful without being helpful." Learning that I was adopted was actually less shocking than everything else that had happened. It explained some things I'd always wondered about. Why I looked different from Emma and my parents. Why my interests and personality were so different from the rest of my family. Why I'd sometimes felt like I was playing a role that didn't quite fit. We hired the same genetic counselor that Marcus had been working with, Lisa Martinez, to help us navigate what she called genetic discovery trauma. Apparently, situations like ours are more common than you'd think, especially as DNA testing becomes more popular. People discover they're adopted, find out they have different biological fathers than they thought, learn about siblings they never knew existed. The technology that's supposed to give you answers about your identity sometimes just creates more questions. Lisa helped us understand that Marcus and I hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had Emma or our parents, really. We were all just trying to navigate a situation that nobody had anticipated or prepared for. The shame and disgust I'd been feeling about our relationship started to fade as I realized that loving someone isn't wrong, even if circumstances make that love impossible to sustain. Marcus and I have talked a few times since he moved out, mostly through texts, just checking in to see how the other person is doing. Strange and painful, but also necessary. We were important to each other for 3 years, and that doesn't just disappear because we can't be together anymore. Lisa says that finding a way to maintain some kind of relationship as siblings eventually might actually be healthy for all three of us, but that it will probably take time. Emma has been incredible through all of this. She's the one who suggested we start doing things together as siblings, consciously building a different kind of relationship with Marcus than the one he and I used to have. We've had a few awkward coffee meetings, the three of us, where we talk about neutral topics and try to figure out how to be family instead of whatever we were before. I'm dating someone new now, a guy named David who I met through friends and who knows the whole story about Marcus. It's moving slowly, partly because I'm being more cautious than I used to be, and partly because I'm still processing everything that happened. But it feels good to be with someone who doesn't come with any biological complications or family secrets. The weird thing is that I'm grateful for that DNA test now, even though it destroyed the life I thought I was building, because the truth, as painful as it was, gave all of us the chance to build something real instead of something based on unknowing deception. Marcus and I couldn't have had a healthy long-term relationship built on a foundation we didn't understand. Emma deserved to know she had a brother. I deserved to know I was adopted and that my biological family was more complicated than I'd ever imagined. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never gotten suspicious about Marcus's behavior. If I'd never ordered that DNA test, would we have gotten married, had children? Would the truth have come out eventually? Or would we have lived our entire lives not knowing? I honestly can't decide which scenario would have been worse. What I do know is that the experience taught me something important about love and truth. Real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds something meaningful, can't exist without honesty, even when that honesty is painful. Marcus and I loved each other genuinely, But our relationship was built on an incomplete understanding of who we were. Once we knew the truth, continuing that relationship would have been built on denial, and that's not the same thing as love. Dr. Patterson asks me sometimes if I regret the relationship with Marcus, knowing what I know now. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain it caused everyone involved. I regret that we can't go back to the innocence of not knowing. But I don't regret loving him, because that love was real. It taught me what I want in a partner and what I'm capable of giving someone else. Marcus, Emma, and I are figuring out how to be siblings slowly, carefully, with a lot of professional help and family therapy sessions that are sometimes awkward and sometimes surprisingly meaningful. We're learning about our biological parents who were young and unable to care for 3 children. It's been made the difficult decision to place us all for adoption with different families. We're learning about each other as people rather than as romantic partners or strangers. And you know what? Marcus is a pretty great brother. He's funny and thoughtful and protective in exactly the way you'd want a big brother to be. Emma adores him. Watching them build a sibling relationship has been one of the few purely positive things to come out of this entire situation. I still miss what Marcus and I had sometimes, especially late at night when I'm falling asleep alone. I miss the easy intimacy, the shared jokes, the feeling of being completely known by someone. But I've learned that missing something doesn't mean it was meant to be. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go of something that can't be healthy, even when letting go breaks your heart. The DNA test I ordered to catch my boyfriend cheating ended up revealing that he wasn't cheating at all. He was my brother.
Oh.
Trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about something that would change both our lives forever. It saved our relationship by ending it and gave us the chance to build something different. Something honest, something that might actually last. Now, when people ask me about genetic testing, I tell them to be prepared for answers they never expected to, questions they didn't know they were asking. DNA doesn't lie, but sometimes the truth it reveals is more complicated than you ever imagined it could be.